G'day cheeky dogs, my name's Margie and I'm an Australian currently living in America. And today we're going to be talking about the new Bluey episode Wild Girls and why it's actually now one of the lowest rated episodes of Bluey, especially for this season 3C 9 episodes that we've gotten so far. Because it's not only just the viewers who are feeling kind of like about this episode, but Joe Brumm himself actually also kind of feels this way too. So we are going to be talking about all the behind Bluey podcast details that they released in the Ludo Studios team podcast that comes out the day after the episode, because there are some also really cool details about movie references, TV and comic book references, some extra details about Greek mythology, and also like the hunter-gatherer farmer allegory that they have in this. So we're going to talk about some of the really cool stuff in this episode, as well as some of the kind of stuff in this episode and why maybe it didn't really land with audiences the way it was supposed to.
This episode of Bluey is called Wild Girls.
So let's start off with some of the fun stuff first, with of course our traditional Easter eggs, and we do have a long dog in this episode. You only see it once at the very end. It's right behind Coco and it's drawn into the sand. So maybe one of the girls drew it with a stick, which is kind of cool. We also have quite a few movie and TV and comic book references as well. So the forest itself was actually given a lot of inspiration from Gravity Falls, as well as Zelda, as well as Asterix the comics. They talked about this in the Behind Bluey podcast. It's always so interesting hearing like what inspired them to create the certain color schemes for each type of scene, because they said they really wanted to make it look very different, the forest versus like the farmland, even though they're technically all in the same area. Now, the scene between Winton and Coco when she first comes out of the forest as well had like a lot of inspirations for horror movie kind of vibes. So they did talk about The Village as well as the movie Witch on the Behind Bluey podcast, and definitely when you see that, you can feel that kind of like kind of scary moment, and I thought that was really cool. Now, Calypso also just magically appearing out of nowhere to comfort Coco. Now, apparently she was supposed to kind of embody Athena, like a Greek god appearing out of nowhere to bring wisdom to like their children or their followers. So I do love that Joe Brumm said that like he specifically wanted that Greek god Athena feel, and I totally got that with Calypso, especially with the light beam coming down. And a lot of people thought that this kind of showed that she has like teleportation magic, because there's like these little like blue dots all coming around and like this beautiful music that comes with her. But they did say in the podcast that this is actually meant to be like dust particles because of the light beam. But I don't know, it really does make Calypso feel very, very magical, I think, in this episode. Now, let's talk about some of the character details that maybe you might have missed, with one of my favorite ones being Winton. I love Winton so much. That's the earrings I have for today. But Winton being a scarecrow, it was kind of like this ongoing joke that he was a very bad scarecrow, because every time we cut back to him, we see that there are more and more birds there. So he's not really doing his job very well. We do, of course, also see Coco howling, and we hear Winton howling as well. So again, just really sort of pushing that idea that the kids, when they have like a lot of emotions, kind of revert back into their dog selves. This is also the first time that we've seen Pretzel actually speak since the episode Calypso. So I did love getting to see him, and I love the new game toilet tag as well. This is also now the third episode where we have a character running across the end credit scenes. And we also have the Bluey Rusty gag. So I spotted this when we did our live stream watch along. When you see them next to each other and they're doing the exact same position, like you really can see just how similar they are. For those of you who don't know, Rusty was originally meant to be the main character, which is why his and Bluey's design is almost the exact same except for their tail. Now, let's talk about that hunter-gatherer versus farmer allegory that was going on. Now, Joe Brumm did say in the podcast that he got this idea of trying to show these two different types of cultures from his older brother, who is an archaeologist, and we've seen a lot of that inspiration throughout the show with a lot of different things, especially with Flat Pack. And I feel like a lot of people thought that maybe that's where this was going to go, was sort of like a Flat Pack direction, but it never really did. And again, I kind of feel like that's where it kind of fell a bit short or flat, because we were expecting more, but more never happened. But aside from that though, I think they did do a pretty good job of trying to show the difference of cultures between the hunter-gatherers and the farmers as well. In the farmland, they only had the one stump, so that was meant to sort of show that they had already cleared all the forest there to become farmers. They had a lot of references to like increasing technology, like getting a tractor, and Rusty getting his new quad bike, which also apparently was Joe Brumm's favorite line in the show, and I think it was probably all of our favorite lines in the show.
I can't be dealing with witches. I just bought a new quad bike.
They also did originally have Chloe and Indy holding sticks as like spears when they were chasing Winton around, but it turns out that that actually got cut. I think this is something interesting as well that we find out from the podcast, is that ABC in Australia also sort of is quite strict with the show and showing like what they can and can't see. Like they can't show religious iconography, but also nothing like dangerous, like kids running and holding sticks, which of course is dangerous. So it was really interesting to hear that like this is what they start off with, and then like the editing notes that they get throughout the episodes. Now the other really cool thing I think was with this allegory about them sort of talking about the idea of like first contact and some of the issues that did arise between like hunter-gatherer cultures versus farming cultures just in history in general. We do see that Coco is like very much against Indy like going over to becoming a farmer. Like she thinks they're dangerous, she doesn't like them. And then also on the flip side, when they see like the elder from the hunter-gatherers, they immediately like try to make them dangerous by saying that they're a witch. So there was some like interesting undertones and layers to this as well. But I did also like that they kind of made the idea of like the child could branch both cultures and unite them in a way. So that's what Indy's role was in this. Now, in saying that, let's talk about some of the issues that happened with this episode and why maybe it kind of fell a bit flat for some people.
Indy is in charge of Indy, sweetheart.
So I do love the line that Indy is in charge of Indy, and I think a lot of us agree that that's a really fantastic line. However, we also see Indy kind of being a bit more of like a people pleaser. She never really in the end got to get Coco to adapt and play with everyone else or got everyone to adapt together. In the end, she just kind of ended up being the go-between person of having to play both games to make everyone happy. So I feel like that almost didn't work out the way it was. Like Coco almost adapted, but then didn't really. And this goes with the message of games can change a little, with Calypso saying this at the very beginning of the episode. So again, kind of like really pushing that this is the lesson of this episode.
Games can change a little if they need to, Coco.
And then us also sort of seeing that happen during the episode. We see in both this episode as well as in the episode Shadowlands that Coco really just wants to control the games. She either wants to control them so that she wins or she wants to control them so that they play out the way she wants them to play out. And again, I wish that we'd gotten just that little bit of extra details and layers because we know that she's the youngest of 9 kids. So maybe because she can't control anything at home, she wants to control whatever she can in school or with her friends. So I feel like if there was just like maybe just like a little hint to that would have just given a little bit more depth to Coco and us, maybe feeling a little bit more sympathy for her. And I think that's again where this kind of becomes a bit of an issue with the episode, is that it's pulling on themes that we've seen from other episodes and trying to tell them also in a different way, but it's not as good as we've seen in other episodes. So for example, like the friendship triangle. We already saw that in the episode Butterflies, where Judo is the one who's being really controlling, and we feel a lot of sympathy and pity for Bingo, who's being left out. Again, we have the friendship triangle here with Coco being the one who wants to be controlling, but then we kind of end up feeling sympathy for everyone. Chloe doesn't want to play with them but does want to play with them, that Indy wants to go off and play something else but that she feels bad about leaving her friend behind, that Coco ends up getting left out but that's because she's been controlling. It was strange feeling that pity for everyone, but then it not really feeling like it got completely resolved the right way with everyone coming together. And I guess that's true though, like that's the whole message of this lesson, is that games can change a little. They don't change a whole lot. Coco did change a little. She became the Pink Witch for part of the game, but then still got to play Wild Girls as well. And I mean, this is kind of true. Like, kids don't always completely adapt to a new game. Like, this is how kids play. They usually like to stick with what they're doing. Again, I feel like this is a very realistic portrayal of how kids do play together and kid politics within games as well. But I think that's why maybe it falls flat for us as viewers, is because it doesn't feel like it's completely resolved. Now, there is, of course, like a bit of like a parenting lesson in this as well, of the idea that Coco, as the mother, can't always control her children and what they decide to do. And I feel like, again, that's a little bit of like a parenting lesson for those of us who are watching who are parents, that yes, we can love our children and we can want them to do what we want them to do, but if we don't listen to them, try to understand them or respect them, they can just leave us, like how Chloe leaves her. But Indy at least tries to sort of stay and please her mother, and eventually Coco does sort of listen to her a little bit and adapts. Some people also mentioned online that they felt like there was some like religious undertones to this episode as well, and while they did not talk about this on the Behind Bluey podcast, I can sort of see where people are coming from with this, and that's kind of the idea that Calypso is not always right.
Well, Calypso is wrong.
But Calypso's never wrong.
This time she is.
Or at least except for when Coco is hungry.
I'm sorry I said that Calypso was wrong. I was just hungry.
So that was always, I think, like a bit of a funny joke, that like that's why she said Calypso wasn't right, was because she was just hungry and wanted the game to go the way she wanted to. But you can sort of see like the religious undertones of like, you know, you should always be obedient to your God unless I as a parent say, oh no, except for when I say so. So sort of like that idea of like picking and choosing what you want people to believe within your religion. I can see how some people definitely saw that within this concept. Now, in the Behind Bluey podcast, Joe Brom did say that he didn't feel like he really nailed this episode. And it's so interesting that he says that, as well as like all the kind of reviews that are being left online, like on Reddit and Facebook, of everyone else kind of feeling the same way. But I do think like when you listen to where Joe was trying to come from with this episode, it does make a little bit more sense. Like he really wanted to show kid politics when playing a game. He really wanted to show the friendship triangle between girls, especially when they play. And I think he did do a really good job of showing that as well. That is what girls look like when they're trying to play together when there's three people, because it's very much that idea of two's company, three's a crowd, and it's really hard sometimes to play together in a group of three. But it was also really interesting that the game Wild Girls was actually based off a game that Joe's girls actually played at school as well. So I love when we like find out that these games are actually real life games that children are playing. Joe also said that he wanted Joff Bush to make sure that the music really showed like the equality in games, that not one game was better than another, they were just two different games. So whenever we hear the music for Farmers,
Wow, so much food!
You can play if you like. Those could be your farm diggers.
versus the music for Wild Girls, they're both really fun kind of songs to show that both games can be fun and equal, and it's just who's deciding to play what at the time is why people play what they are. Overall for me though, I'm kind of the same as everyone else on Reddit. I'd probably give this episode 3 out of 5 long dogs. I do love the lesson that games can adapt and change a little because they might need to. And of course the game Toilet Tag was hilarious, and the line about Rusty just not having time for witches because he's got a new quad bike. Those were really funny lines and kind of really good gags in this episode. I do just wish that we'd kind of had a little bit more backstory with Coco, and I feel like maybe that would have just given it that little bit more depth that might have pushed it from 3 to maybe 4 or 5 long dogs. And of course, this coming straight after the episode Dragon, there's going to be that little bit of like whiplash because there's not as much backstory and lore in it, but that's just how I feel. So cheeky dogs, let me know in that comment section down below, how did you feel about this episode? Did you feel like Joe did nail it, or did you feel like there was something missing from it? Let me know down below. I love reading your comments. But also, while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button if you love Bluey as much as I do, as well as that subscribe button and that bell for notifications so you know when I'm going to be releasing my next video, which is going to be an evolution video about Coco and what we've seen her go through so far in the 3 seasons of Bluey. Because I do think she's a really interesting character, but sometimes she just kind of gets the short end of the stick in episodes that are meant to be about her. Until then though, I have picked you cheeky dogs out a few other videos that maybe you would like to watch, and I will see you all in another video. Mwah! Bye!